Coverkillernation, thank you for joining me on this cold December afternoon. It is time for us here in December to remember the month in which we are going to recall the 12 months that we have suffered through of what has happened throughout those 12 months and where greatness shined forth. We all know what this is. It's time for the top 25 plus 5 honorable mentions album of the year list for the year 2012. It's amazing. It's great. I came back to the old studio just for the nostalgic purpose of the fact that most of this year was shot right here in this studio. Something special for you guys, something special for me, and it's kind of gotten a little bit cramped in here. So let's get started. Let's start with the 5 honorable mentions before we get into the top 25. So technically, it's like a top 30 list. So number 30, we have Elubite with Helvetos. Now this was an album that came out in the first part of the year. An album whose name I bastardized then and I probably just bastardized now. But in reality, this is a group that's been very solid for the past couple of albums, really for the past couple of years. And this is an album that once again, even though it was shown in the first part of the year, kind of gave me a little bit of a feeling that 2012 is going to be something special. It wasn't going to be like 2011. We were going to have to hold our breath with each passing album that gets released by a band that, at least in the metal community, is considered to have a little bit of history and decency behind it. We didn't have to worry about another Morbid Angel. This is one of the albums that early on in the year, there's a couple others on this list that really proved that 2012 was going to be a lot different than 2011. Number 29 is one from just a couple of months ago, Silverthorn by Camelot. New singer, no problem. Doesn't matter. Still the same band. But the vocals definitely are ones that stay on par with what Khan was able to do prior. And overall, the story and just the real, I guess the real difference of music here is in the fact that it is very creative. There's a lot of discrepancy towards it. There's a lot of different melodies and different tones that they're using on this album that just makes the story all the more real. And this is also exhibited in the fact that in the 2-disc special edition you get one hell of a freaking storybook that goes along with this. It's very, very cool stuff, and this is an excellent album, a good first album in the post-Con era for Camelot. Number 28, L'Enfant Sauvage by Gojira. Now some of you might be like, wow, all that low? Well, Gojira has released some fantastic albums in the early stages of their career, and this is one that, for me, it kind of felt a little bit like it was more of the same. It's still a very solid release, and I remember that whenever it came out, I was very high up on it. But as I revisited this, as the months continued to pass on, this is an album that to me just didn't seem to have the same spark as some of their other work, some of their earlier work, and that's the reason why it's as low as it is. But hey, it's still on the list, which means something, so don't necessarily take its position as an insult. Number 27, we have Stalingrad by Accept. The return of Accept has probably been one of the nicest and most surprising metal pieces of news in the past couple of years, because they returned from this long period of dormancy to release an album in Blood on the Nations that was just tremendous, and now they've released Stalingrad, which really just kind of picks up where that album leaves off and just kicks you in your ass 100% throughout the whole entire thing. It's just a really, really great album, very powerful. And there's just some tracks on here that just really shine and really could potentially be some Song of the Year contenders. That list will be coming a couple days from now. Number 26, we have Erd by Borknagar. Borknagar's career has kind of been one of a lot of experimentation. They've experimented with acoustic albums. They've experimented with singers. This one kind of just takes it all and throws it in one gigantic pot and kind of hopes that it simmers the right way. And it does for the most part. It definitely has a lot of power to it, but at the same time, there are other aspects of their career that I enjoy with a little bit more frequency and enjoy just, I guess, more, I suppose is the best way to put it. So there's your 5 honorable mentions. 5 very diverse pieces of music right there for you in the realm of metal. Now it's time for us to get to the top 25 list. Now there's one note I'm going to make. Like last year, I am going to be doing a top 10 pop and rock list also. There's only one album on this list from that it's also going to be on that list. So one of these albums, and I will mention it whenever we get there, is actually going to be taking home dual honors this year, which is pretty damn awesome. Number 25, Of Breath and Bone by Balakor. Now, this is an album that received a lot of praise whenever it first came out. It's an album that was kind of like certain albums from last year that I claim to be a little bit overhyped. I'm not going to mention any names. However, this one is certainly worth it, not to mention it was not attached on by the same fanboys that defended it with such fierce honor as the album that perhaps I was mentioning from last year. And so, because of that, there is not that much of an afterglow effect or a fanboy, destruction effect. Instead, this is an album that whenever you listen to it, you can enjoy it without feeling as though, every single website that you're going to go on is going to be kissing this album's ass. And because of this, you actually expose a very, very solid release, and one that definitely is worth your experimentation and your curiosity. So let's get to number 24, the very first album that I reviewed in 2012, and it made the list. It made the cut. Resolution by Lamb of God. Now, of course, we've been talking a lot about Lamb of God because of what's been going on with Randy Blythe. However, this album, which was released in January, before all this happened, definitely showcased a band that was kind of at a turning point with their last release with Wraith, and now have moved on and have created a beast of an album. Definitely one of those releases that a band sometimes needs to release in order to say collectively to the world, hey motherfuckers, we're still here. That's exactly what Lamb of God did. Number 23, we have Asphyx with Death Hammer. Now, some of you may not know this band. This might be new news to you guys, but Asphyx has been around doing this whole thing for a while, and their style really is one thing that it's not really commonplace. They have a lot of death and black in their music, and I have to say that one of the best parts of this album, the one part of this album that really, for me, I guess, sold me, was the fact that they did a Celtic Frost cover from Monotheist, and then throughout the course of the rest of the record, they kind of put a Monotheist-like spin on their brand. And by doing that, that combined effort actually made this album feel complete and whole to me. It gave me this sense of directional purpose, where they knew exactly what they were doing, where they were going, and they were able to formulate a musical plan and put it into action. The result was this destructive album. The result was one heck of an album. The result was an album that you guys should definitely check out if you haven't already. I have a feeling that some of you already have. We get to number 22, and we get to the album that might be double dipping. We get to the Deftones with their new album, Koi no Yokon, which was just released about a month or so ago. This is a chapter of the Deftones' career that I think really will be maybe a little underappreciated because of the way in which it's been selling, at least in my area. I really expected a little bit something more. But I think it's going to be the one that a lot of people, once they finally do examine it, are going to be remembering really right up there with elements such as White Pony. Now, this isn't going to be in that same vein or in that same league, where they're going to remember the singles and they're going to know all the words to the singles and blah, 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 blah. No. Instead, this is going to be remembered as being just a solid, consistent, complete record. And the second part of this record sounds as though Chino and the boys just decided to rent a cheap hotel room and fuck Maynard James Keenan, because there are a lot of elements from the Tool and the Pussifer sides of Maynard James Keenan that definitely feel elementally present in the second half of this record. And I gotta say, the second half of this record is one of the main reasons why this album is not only on the list, but got a high praise. Not saying that the first half of the record is any slouch, because as I said, this is a complete record, and it's a consistent record. It's just that the second half, wow, it really has a lot of girth behind it, a lot of muscle behind it, a lot of power behind it. Very good album, very highly recommended. We'll see them again. Number 21, Blood of the Master by Goatwhore. Now, why is this on the list, you may be wondering. There's going to be fans left and right that are going to be like, I hate this album. It doesn't sound like their old stuff. Other people are going to be like, I love this album because it doesn't sound like their old stuff. And then there's going to be some guy in the middle that's just going to be like, there's a new Goatwhore album? What? This album, for me, does, or should I say did, what any great album and any album that should be on this list should really do. And that's, there are bands out there that you kind of expect to be on the list because you expect great things from them, because that's just the reputation that they have built for not only themselves but for their fans. But an album like this took me by surprise. Whenever I first listened to it, it took me by surprise. Whenever I listened to it the second and third time, it still took me by surprise. It still had that same power, that live raw energy that whenever you go into, or you go to a goat horse show, you expect to see destruction, you expect to see chaos, you expect to see a crowd that is just reacting to these songs in a great way. To be able to translate energy that is going to be expressed live onto a studio record is not an easy endeavor, and they definitely seem to capture that with this album, hence why it has been immortalized on this list. How about number 20, Torture by Cannibal Corpse? Cannibal Corpse finally returned to that explicit artwork, and they also return with one heck of a great album. This album has everything that you really would expect from Cannibal Corpse, but a little bit more. You have some bass solos, you have some standard solos, you have just thunderous songs, brutal, destructive, just absolutely 100% explicit. Everything that you would expect from Cannibal Corpse. This is probably one of their most solid releases ever since the turn of the century. The turn of the century. What the hell am I talking about? The turn of the millennium. Fuck it. And I really like this because it had a very consistent flow to it. It's not an album that feels like you are kind of spinning the same wheel over and over again and getting the same result with every single track. Every single track kind of keeps you in that same motif, but offers a little bit something different. That way it feels fresh. And that's something where I think a lot of death metal bands sometimes lose their focus. They kind of get so geared toward doing one thing right, and then once they get that right, they don't really offer too much of a difference because they're afraid it won't be brutal enough, it won't be explicit enough, it won't, satisfy their breed of fan. But in reality, to have a tremendous album, you do have to be able to step it up just a little bit. Cannibal Corpse did that, and that's why they're number 20. About number 19, Weather Systems by Anathema. You're going to notice, starting with Cannibal Corpse and Anathema, that every single band and every single album that was on the mid-year list actually made it to the end list. That's how good that these albums were at the first part of the year. The reason why they're in different positions now is because the second half of the year happened. Anathema had a fantastically focused album that was able to really do the opposite side of what the previous winner, Cannibal Corpse, did. They instead focused very much on the atmospheric, on the emotional. They were able to channel in many different facets of humanity in order to create a spectacular album that has great stories behind it, that has some heartbreaking elements to it. There are many different, feelings that you can get from listening to this album. And whenever you're able to do that, especially in the business that they are in, whether you want to call it alternative metal, prog rock, progressive alternative, whatever you want to call it. Some people may even call it avant-garde. Whatever you want to call it, in that line of business, doing exactly what they did with this album is exactly what you want to do. And they did it very, very well. Number 18, Neobliviscaris with Portal of Eye. This is one of those bands that kind of just takes you by surprise. Happens every year. There's always a couple of bands that, a couple people catch a listen to it, they share it to a couple of people, and it just kind of goes global. It's one of those things where you kind of explore this band sort of on a whim, and you're just completely blown away with it. At one point in time in the 2000s, one band did that for my friend Rob and I, Communic, and that album ended up being Album of the Year that year. So, it's something that's happened before. But this album, though, it just completely takes you by surprise. You're taken on this long journey of metal, and you don't want to silence it. You don't want to stop it because it's just kind of intriguing. It draws you in. They combine so many different elements that you just feel like you are getting a fresh take and a fresh buzz each and every time you listen. Now, is this an album that perhaps has been a little bit overhyped, or at least was during the first portion of the year? It's very possible. However, whenever you listen to the work, you start to understand why people were so up on this album and why they were so excited about it, because it definitely has the it factor that you look for. Let's move on. Let's go to Catatonia with Dead End Kings coming in at number 17. This album feels like it really doesn't get itself going until the tail end of it, and this is something that I've observed and a couple of other people that I've talked to about the album have observed. So it's sort of just An album that doesn't seem to fully get its total punch going until the very last ditch effort, the very last couple of tracks. And for Catatonia, I wouldn't even call this a goose egg. I would just say that this is their sound maybe changing and metamorphosizing a little bit. Because of that, there is a little bit of growing pain to it, and I think this might be the growing pain album. But the lead-off single that they kind of heralded this album with, wow, let me tell you. I remember my track review of that. That's a hell of a song. Let's move on to Swallow the Sun, Emerald Forest, and the Blackbird at number 16. This is one of those albums that was from early in the year. It was also getting a little bit of widespread acclaim, but then you listen to it and you start to realize that Swallow the Sun, kind of in the background, has really become not only a consistent band, but goddamn good at doom metal. And they really, really proved it with this album. I really have to give them a lot of credit. I've listened to Swallow the Sun, basically for most of the past decade, and they've always been consistent. They've always delivered me solid work, and this one, though, is just kind of in a league of its own. So, great job to those guys. How about we go to number 15 with Overkill and the Electric Age. Now, after having the Thrasher piece that came out, to the degree of Ironbound, how is Overkill going to top that? I mean, really, it's just such a difficult thing to try to consistently write amazing records, especially in the realm of thrash metal, and still make it feel fresh. I don't know how Bobby and the boys still do it, but goddamn did they do it. This might not be as high as Ironbound was, because I don't think it's quite as good of an album as Ironbound was, and this is after listening to both of them back-to-back probably, oh god, too many times to count this summer. And it's just an album that still, even though it's not as good as Ironbound, it doesn't have to be. It's fucking fantastic by its own right. You don't necessarily have to top your predecessor in order to be, to still have a fantastic album. You can come just short and still end up on this list. Look, it did. And this is another album that shows how timeless that Bobby Blitz Ellsworth's voice is. This is one of those things where his voice will still be going like that even whenever Keith Richards finally dies of old age at age like 7,000. So, yeah, fantastic stuff, great album. How about number 14? Let's get into another thrash band. Let's get into Dark Roots of Earth by Testament. I remember whenever I first talked about this album, I said that maybe, just maybe, it was a little hokey. And you know what? I still kind of feel that sometimes. But that doesn't deny the fact that this album is a mammoth monster. That doesn't deny the fact that this is an album that whenever you listen to it, it's very, very difficult to shut off or put down. That's another mark of a great album. Even though you find one aspect corny or hokey because of a lyrical concept in the first track, I admit that's pretty much all it was, I still couldn't put it down. It was still fantastic. It's still one of those things that if I were in my car and I was driving around listening to this album, I had to keep driving until the damn thing was done. And there are some tracks on here that are magnificent. They really, really do still showcase a little bit of that emotional side you heard on some of their early 1990s works, with songs such as Return to Serenity. They were able to paint that on here, and it was just a really, really good affair. So how about we go to number 13, Eremita by Ishan. It is once again time for us to praise the fact that this guy that used to be an emperor has gone solo and has really embraced this progressive black metal art and has just completely transformed it. He has made this something for artists of this nature to really quest for and zest for. And these albums are always on this list. I mean, there are time frames where you think it'll be number 1, and it ends up being number 4, number 6. This one's number, 13. It's a consistency thing, and the consistency thing is the best mark on a solo provider's career. And this is just another example as to why this guy is king of solo progressive black metal. He just is a beast. It's amazing. Check this album out. Please do. Number 12, we have Storm Corrosion with their self-titled album. Mikael Ackerfeet, and Steven Wilson finally got together. They have their Storm Corrosion baby. And, wow, it's weird. It's a really strange album. It's a dark album. It's got all sorts of different hooks and turns. They're very, very uneven structures. This is an art piece, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't necessarily for the faint of heart. This isn't necessarily for people who like nice conventional structures that Opeth and Porcupine Tree maybe, in their eyes, have been able to provide for them for now 2 decades. No, this isn't that album. This isn't your granddaddy's Porcupine Tree or Opeth album. This is instead really examining the roots of just weirded out progressive rock that does have a little bit of a metallic component. And yeah, that's about it. It is a very strange release. This is a release that will make you uncomfortable. This is a release that will make you feel wrong, and you'll like every minute of it. It's an album that really, it's kind of like a KO Daughter, a Model in the Well album, where it sometimes takes some time to appreciate it. You kind of have to get yourself in the mindset, listen to it a couple times, but damn, whenever it finally opens up in your head, you know, once you finally kind of get it, I guess, is the best way to say it. Wow, a lot of power, a lot of power. Number 11, Le Voyage d'Am by Alcé. Once again, another group of consistency. Once again, the most beautiful soundscapes in metal. I'm telling you what, this backing, this, you know, shoegaze style of metal, as people may want to call it, is just absolutely brilliant, you know. We saw early roots of this in alternative rock with bands such as My Bloody Valentine, and now this guy, now Alcé, is taking it to just a brand new level in the metal realm. Now, this has been done before by other groups, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he's the first to do it, because he's not. This has been actually pretty potent over the past 10 years. But he's taken us to a level now where he's gotten global appreciation, and a lot of people know this guy's work, a lot of people respect this guy's work, and whenever they see new work from him, a lot of people have high expectations for his work. And so far in his career, so far in their career as a band, they have not been let down. So number 10, we get to the new 2013 inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Rush, with their album Clockwork Angels. Let me tell you, Rush has been doing this, you know, music thing for quite some time, just in case you're not aware. And they've come back and they have made probably one of their most powerful and one of their best albums since, well, some people will say Moving Pictures, but there's a lot of other good stuff in between. I thought Snakes and Arrows was pretty damn good, but damn. Clockwork Angels is a story within a story, it seems, and it is also an album that just showcases a band that is not willing to lay down the cross or lay down the torch and pass it to somebody else. And in this case, it's not a bad thing at all, because it's not as though they're overstaying their welcome. Instead, they're putting forth a fantastic release. This is an album that rivals their stuff from the 70s, mixed with the charm of the most recent era of Rush, where they've gotten a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and things have maybe gotten a little bit simpler. But even with that said, wow. Gotta have massive and fierce appreciation for this work, because it's a hell of an album. Number 9, High on Fire with the Vermis Mysterious. This is an album that has not left my car since I got it. That is reason enough. This is sludge metal that's able to get a little bit aggressive, and then at some points in time just feels like they just baked out and decided to write something that has a lot of effect, a lot of reverb, a lot of just, you know, atmosphere behind it that just sort of swirls. You know, there's a tightness to the bass sound. You know, they crank their amplifiers to fucked and basically just jammed out. And whenever they do that, whenever they slow it down, whenever they have those moments, this is almost impossible to deny. This band is for real. They have been for real ever since they first got started, but this album has taken it to a new level. These guys are going to be appreciated and loved by many for a long, long time. Just you wait and see. If you know somebody that doesn't know High on Fire, recommend them High on Fire. Number 8, Devin Townsend with Epic Cloud. We thought Ghost was beautiful, and Ghost was pretty beautiful, but Epic Cloud, wow. Epic Cloud took things and kind of merged them. He merged the beauty of Ghost, which was very serene, and then was able to eke in a little bit more of, I guess, of experimentation to it. He just keeps going further and further with this, and the result here are very lovely songs that touch base on multiple different topics. And really, if you want to have a lot of fun, I'm not sure if they're still available, but there are some roaming torrents available. I'm sure that you guys have all bought the album by now, but there are some roaming torrents around that have his commentary on it as you listen to the record from a CD release party. Definitely check that out, because that's just a really cool little inside window into the album itself, kind of the thought processes and where the tracks kind of came from. And you know, Devi's just kind of a cool guy to just listen to. So there you go. Let's move on to number 7, Between the Buried and Me, the Parallax Part 2 Future Sequence. This is going to be number 1 in a lot of magazines. I can already tell you that right there. A lot of magazines are hyping the shit out of this album, and it's fair, because Between the Buried and Me has just continued to expand their universe, and now with the epic, massive full-length conclusion to their EP from last year. They have really showcased that they still haven't missed a beat. I still, for one, will always feel that Colors is an untouchable achievement, that really, to somehow defeat Colors will require some sort of, hand of Satan. You're going to have to, like, barter your soul for a CD better than Colors. It's not going to happen. But this one, pretty damn close. It definitely came a lot closer than The Great Misdirected. Who hates batteries? I do. This list is so awesome that it requires 2 sets. Let's move on to number 6, which is, of course, Woods of Eeps, Woods 5, Gray Skies, and Electric Light. What cannot be said about David Gold? What cannot be said about the Typo Negative style influence with darkened metal that is on this album? And what cannot be said about how this album seemed to eerily hypothesize and kind of, foreplan his death? This is just a very, very amazing piece of art that this gentleman was able to construct, and it was something that unfortunately is the final thing that he ever got to construct. And it was almost as though he knew. Like, it seems that so many artists do seem to know, and it's something that just continues to boggle my mind and other, music critics or anybody who loves music's mind, how these artists are sometimes able to feel that perhaps their time on this earth is short, and it is very, very rapidly coming to a close. This album is full of emotion. It is one hell of a journey. It is a tremendous release. Truly the best work has been saved for last. And this tremendous album lands on this list at number 6. That brings us to number 5. Everyone probably thought this would be number 1. Because it probably is on your list. Or their list. Or something like that. Winter Sun with Time Part 1. This isn't a great album. This is a great album, don't get me wrong. This is an album that is definitely worth the tremendously long and arduous journey of a wait that we had to deal with just to see this, in our fingertips. But it finally happened. 2012 is the year that Winter Sun finally finished Time. Part 1. That's the big thing about this album. I mean, it is a tremendous, it's a tremendous release. It has a lot of different influence. The power metal's great. The death metal style vocals are awesome. The cleans are magnificent. It leaves you wanting more. It leaves you wanting Time Part 2. Am I saying that's the reason why it's not number 1? No, there are other things. There are just better albums this year, but definitely something that is the mark of a great album is that it leaves you thirsting for more if more is planned to be released. In this case, Time Part 2 is due to be released in 2013 in the springtime. That's the tentative date, of course, and it should happen because it's done. But either way, it leaves you wanting more. Great album. Definitely worth the wait. Number 4. We've made it to number 4, which is Retire by Enslaved. Enslaved were number 1 in 2010. Didn't quite make it here in 2012, but that's not to say that this isn't a tremendous album. This is one where they continue on their progressive black and metal direction that is just continuously expanding its universe, kind of by the day, by the album, by the hour, by the minute. And once again, this kind of very personal journey that they were able to concoct with this album really just bends space and time for the genre, and once again continues to really show that black and metal with that kind of Viking folk style that's kind of fused in there with it. If you focus in other elements to it, if you focus in different structures to it, if you kind of go outside the box, outside the circle, man, there are some things that you're going to find, that you're going to discover, and that you are going to create that truly just is mind expanding, that you have never heard before. That's why they are at number 4. Number 3, the massive Yellow and Green by Baroness. This 2-album set, of course, was wildly heralded, and it continues on the theme of colors. This album is able to definitely diversify their sound a lot more and really open and expand their universe tremendously. Throughout these 2 albums, they were able to go down many, many roads. Some included, the same ideas that you're kind of used to, that sludgy rock that they were able to give, a little bit more of an aggressive style. But whenever you really look down deep, there was also elements of, country metal, so to speak, in it, where there's a little bit more of a twang effect to it. There's a little bit of Americana. There's a very independent charm to it, even though it's not indie whatsoever. They have experimental, structures as far as vocally that remind you almost of a, new age more heavy Beach Boys. And, whenever you go into that and whenever you consider things that have been done by other acts like Pure Reason Revolution, you can really see that the tide in of influence is just, phenomenal. And this album really showcased Baroness at their top. This is probably going to be their finest hour, unless somehow the next color in their universal palette is able to exceed it, which really right now at this point with Baroness, it very well possibly could. But what do you do after an amazing double album, a triple album? Best of luck to you. Call Green Day, find out how that worked out for them. Now that brings us to the top two. I don't need that any longer. Number 2, we have Autotheism by the Faceless. This is an album that, well, let me tell you, was going to make it onto this list based around 1 technical song, 3 technical tracks, and is as high as it is on this list because of the absolute magnitude of greatness that this album is able to achieve through very few things. First off, the autotheist movements, the 3 movements, are definite nominees for Song of the Year. You would think that I would have already penciled this in as the winner, but I'm not like that. I like to examine everything one more time and kind of look and see truly if it wasn't just overplayed hype or if it was something that was legitimate. However, this album, even though it seems like it lulls a bit in the middle, still has a lot of power and magnitude to it. And a lot of people are going to complain about the vocals, saying that they're kind of stainedy. They kind of have this like really modern mainstream twang to them, and that's just the way the guy sings. Lay off the dude. If the dude sounded like fucking Shania Twain, then I have a problem, because why is he sounding like Shania Twain? That's a girl, but you get the point. Instead, he's just using a clean voice that worked with the song absolutely perfectly, and the transition into the death growls, the death vocals, was just awesome. You look at the movements and you see that this is the power, this is the glory, this is the majesty. This alone is what makes an album like this just shoot right up the charts and be deserving of every accolade that it receives. And really, to be honest, even though the middle part lulls, I think one of the main reasons why it does is because the climax point of the album was the first 3 tracks. The first journey that you get is probably one of the most expansive and amazing songs that you're going to hear in 2012. And sometimes whenever you lead with that best foot forward and that best foot ends up being like a marathon ahead of everything else feels pretty weak in comparison. So this album is number 2. And that brings us to number 1. That brings us to an old favorite, a giant. Yeah, you guys knew what was coming. Creator, Phantom Antichrist. The mid-season number 1 has become number 1 for the entire year. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. Some of you are looking at me like, well, I saw this coming. Well, good for you! Congratulations! You have 20/20 vision, and you also have 20/20 hindsight, because you remember that it was number 1 whenever we hit June. The main reason why this is number 1 is not only because of the music, but also because of the revolution that it started. It started that revolution inside of my soul. It started a revolution among the community. It started a revolution just within our mindsets. This is an album that also started a revolution in Teutonic thrash. Listen to Destruction's new album and tell me that it doesn't have that same inkling of revolutionary ideals that I mentioned not only in that review as Creator's Phantom Antichrist. Don't even tell me that it doesn't, because it has that same vastness, that same punch in the face, that same kick in the teeth, that same absolute punting into the balls effect that Phantom Antichrist had in June. Now, am I giving it the nod just because it was the forebear, the first one to do it? No, fuck that. It's also because of the material on that album. This is an album that is impossible to put down, for me at least, and plus this is my goddamn list, motherfuckers, so bring it. But not only is this an album that is difficult to put down, it is an album that is hard to put down after it's over, which means you just want to repeat it. There have been car journeys that I've listened to this album 3 or 4 times before I finally have decided to shut it off. This is very similar for me in magnitude to Rust in Peace by Megadeth in that regard. This might not necessarily, in the opinions of all Creator fans across the universe, be their best album. And I probably, upon re-listening to all of their discography, may agree with you on that. And I might be willing to give you that. However, this is definitely an album that seems to have the most meaning to it. This is an album that definitely feels collectively focused to the motherfucking brink. And this is an album that also has the history and really the magnitude of the events of this year and the past 12 to 18 months really riding on it. This album is number one because musically it is a very, very solid, diverse, beautiful release. And whenever I say beautiful, I really mean brutal. God damn. There are some solos in here that are just insanity. There are some hooks in here that you just open your mouth agape to it. The first time I listened to this album, I thought that I was going to climax myself and to the point that I was going to die. Because it seemed like at every single new step, new turn, new juncture, I was being left spellbound. And I was being changed. Change is one thing that this album can do. And that's what it did to me. And that is why this album is number one. Phantom Antichrist may not have made this top 25 to 30 list all of that, thrilling or compelling, because number one seems so heir apparent. And number one was heir apparent. Sometimes the album of the year is chosen literally the day in which the list comes out. Other times, you can almost just tell. You can almost just tell from the first time you listen to it. You can almost just tell from the 70th time that you listen to it. This one was pretty much right from the start. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 2012 Album of the Year list done in the books, which means another season of Cover Killer Nation has come to a conclusion. I want to thank each and every one of you for not only sitting through this video, because it is lengthy and required 2 sets of batteries, but also for sticking with me, being a subscriber, being a friend, being a fan of metal and of me and everything like that, being part of this community. This community runs, lives, breathes, eats, sleeps, and dies by you guys, so never stop. Continue to promote the channel, continue to promote the community, continue to promote music and heavy fucking metal. I will see you guys in 2013. I think I'm going to take a little break. I don't know. We're going to find out. Stay metal. I'll see you guys later.